The Colorado Territory, 1877. Spring had come late to the high country, and the air still held the memory of snow, a sharp bite beneath the scent of dry pine and wild thyme. The sun was a molten coin, slipping behind the jagged peaks that cradled Silver Basin, painting the valley in hues of bruised purple and blazing copper. The wind, a constant presence here, combed through the tall grasses, making them sigh. A lonely, restless sound. It was a land of brutal beauty, a place that demanded everything of a person and promised only space in return. The stagecoach, a rattling box of dust and weary bones, lurked to a stop. Its wheels, caked in the red mud of the Gunnison, groaned in protest. For a moment, the only sound was the jingle of the harness and the heavy breathing of the horses. Then the door creaked open. Wren Calloway descended. She moved with the stiff precision of someone who had been folded into a cramped space for too many days. Her traveling suit was a deep, sensible gray, but the dust of 1,000 miles had turned it to the color of the earth. She clutched two things. In one hand, a valise, its leather corners worn through to the wood, its handle smooth from her grip. In the other, a slim leather folio. Tucked inside were not references from fine ladies in the East, but a collection of children's letters, her sole credentials, written in the looping, earnest script of pupils she had left behind. She stood alone as the stage driver tossed her bag into the dirt and, with a grunt, climbed back to his seat. With a crack of the whip, the coach lumbered away, leaving her in a sudden, profound silence, marooned in a sea of red rock and endless sky. This was the Blue Mesa outfit. It was less a town than a statement of defiance against the wilderness. A sturdy, two-story ranch house built of thick-hewn logs sat squat against the rising slope, flanked by a barn and a web of corrals. Smoke, thin and gray, rose from the stone chimney, a fragile signal of life. Her purpose was as plain and sturdy as her boots. She had come to answer an advertisement for a housekeeper and tutor. She had come to work, but more than that, she had come to escape. She had fled the suffocating parlors of Philadelphia, fled the whispers that followed her like a shadow, the pitying looks, the quiet, devastating verdict barren. The word, spoken by a man in a starched collar, had become her identity. She, Wren Calloway, who had loved books and music and the smell of baking bread, was now defined only by the one thing she could not do. She could not be a mother. A man was on the porch. He hadn't moved to help her, nor had he called out a greeting. He just stood there, leaning against a support beam, arms crossed. He was part of the landscape, as solid and weathered as the timber he resembled. He wore trousers tucked into muddy boots and a plain homespun shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and etched with sun. His face was hard to read, partially obscured by a dark beard, but his eyes, steady and gray as a river stone, missed nothing. He had the calm, settled smile of a man who had seen worse things than a lone woman arriving at dusk. Wren pulled her shoulders back, a gesture that was both a defiance and a bracing. She picked up her valise, the folio pressed tight against her ribs, and walked toward the house. The mud tried to claim her boots with every step. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, forcing him to look down at her, or her to look up at him. She chose the former. "Mr. Dalton." Her voice was hoarse from the dust. "Ma'am." His voice was low, a rumble that seemed to come from the porch boards themselves. She had rehearsed this. She had said it to herself in the rattling coach, said it to the unblinking stars in the small hours of the morning at lonely way stations. It was a shield, a warning, a piece of truth she laid down first, like a bad card she was forced to play. "Mr. Dalton, before this goes any further, there is something you must know. I am here for the position. I can cook, I can clean, and I am a more than able teacher. But I cannot be a mother." She watched his face. She expected the flicker of pity, the awkward cough, the polite dismissal. She had seen it all before. Shaw Dalton did none of those things. He uncrossed his arms. He pushed himself off the post, his movements economical and sure. He walked to the edge of the porch, not looming over her, just closing the distance. He looked at her. Truly looked. Not at her womb. Not at her failure, but at the person standing on his land. He brought a tin cup to his lips, a cup she hadn't noticed, and took a slow sip of water. The sound was loud in the twilight. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and then he spoke, his tone as matter-of-fact as if discussing the weather. "Good." Wren blinked. The word hung in the air. Shaw Dalton clarified, his gaze level. "I've got 3 calling you Mama already. The last one left 6 months back. The title's vacant. The work ain't," as if summoned by his words. The front door, which had been ajar, swung open. 3 small figures spilled out onto the porch, framed in the warm yellow light from within. The first was a girl of about 8. She was thin and wiry, with a braid of dark hair so tight it seemed to pull at her temples. Her eyes were her father's, sharp and analytical. She held a broom almost as tall as she was, and she looked at Wren not as a person, but as a problem to be solved or a tool to be measured. The second was a boy, perhaps 6. He was a shadow of the girl, slighter, with a tangle of brown hair falling into his eyes. He clutched a small, whittled horse to his chest, his knuckles white. He did not look at Wren at all, but at the space just to her left, as if she were a hole in the air. The third was a tumble of golden curls, a girl no older than 3. She toddled out, paused, her thumb in her mouth, her eyes wide and curious. Then, before anyone could move, she launched herself down the steps. She did not run to her father. She ran straight to Wren, her tiny body colliding with Wren's legs, her small, sticky hands grabbing handfuls of the gray, dusty skirt. Wren froze. The shock of the impact, the sudden, anchoring weight of a child, was so foreign it was like a jolt of electricity. The little girl looked up, her face smeared with what might have been molasses. She smiled, a gap-toothed, trusting smile, and said a single, garbled word that sounded something like Mama. "Poppy," Shaw Dalton said, his voice unchanged. "Let the lady be." But the child just burrowed her face into the skirt, a small, warm presence clinging to her. "Nora," the older girl said. "Her name's Nora. His is Huck. And that's Poppy. She's too small to know better." Nora's voice was crisp, an echo of a schoolmarm. "Nora," Shaw said, a quiet warning. Wren found her voice. She looked down at the golden head, then up at the man. It's all right," slowly, almost painfully. Wren Calloway uncurled her fingers from the handle of her valise. She placed her hand, still covered in its thin leather glove, on Poppy's head. The curls were soft, alive. Shaw nodded, as if a transaction had been completed. "The house is warm. Supper's on." He picked up Wren's valise as if it weighed nothing and turned, leading the way inside. The interior of the house was simple, but it was not poor. A fire roared in a massive stone hearth, casting a dancing, welcome light over everything. The main room was large, encompassing a kitchen on one end and a living space on the other. A long plank table was set with tin plates. The air was thick with the savory smell of simmering beans and salt pork, and beneath it, the clean, sharp scent of mint, steeping in a tin teapot on the back of the stove. The floors were swept clean. The curtains, though faded, were mended. It was a house that was fought for, every day. Nora and Huck had already scrambled to the table, their movements practiced. Poppy, however, remained attached to Wren's skirt, finally allowing Wren's hand to pry her loose and guide her to a low stool. "Your room is this way," Shaw said, not waiting for a reply. He led her to a small door tucked beside the fireplace. It was not a room. It was a space. It held a narrow cot, a wash basin on a stand with a matching pitcher, and a small, scarred wooden trunk at the foot of the bed. A single, small window looked out not toward the valley, but into the rising darkness of the mountain behind the house. It was bare. It was stark. It was perfect. Shaw set her valise on the floor. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "The children eat first, then us. Water in the pitcher is fresh. Basin's out the back door if you need it." I'll call you for supper." He left, pulling the door quietly closed behind him. Wren stood in the center of the tiny room. She could hear the muffled sounds of the house through the thin wood, the clatter of spoons on plates, Nora's sharp-voiced command, Huck's quiet non-reply, Poppy's happy babble. She let out a breath she felt she had been holding since she left Philadelphia. She was here. She was tired. She was hungry. And she was, for the first time in a year, not being judged. She was being utilized. She took off her hat, her fingers fumbling with the pin. She unbuttoned her gloves, one finger at a time, and laid them on the trunk. She looked at her hands, pale and fine-boned, but capable. She thought of the little girl's head, the warmth of it. She thought of the boy with the wooden horse, his eyes full of shadows. She thought of the girl with the broom, already a fortress. And she thought of the man, Shaw Dalton, who had looked at her greatest shame and called it good. Wren Calloway walked to the narrow cot and sat down. The ropes creaked beneath her slight weight. She looked at the rough-hewn walls, the single nail driven into the wood to serve as a closet. She whispered the words into the small, safe dark. "I'll stay." It was not a promise to them. It was a promise to herself. She sat for a long time, just breathing. The chill of the room seeped into her bones, but it was a clean chill, not the damp, creeping cold of pity. When she finally stood, her gaze was different. The defensive, brittle look she had worn as armor for so long had begun to crack. As she reached for the wash basin, she remembered the feeling of Poppy's small hand, finding hers in the dusk, not asking for anything, just holding on. Here, in the land of red dirt and wide sky, the hollow in her found a place to name itself. It was not barrenness. It was just space, waiting to be filled. The light in the high country did not arrive gently. It was a cold, surgical gray that found the gap under Wren's door precisely at 5 in the morning, long before the sun had troubled the peaks. She was already awake, her body still aching from a bed she was not used to, listening to the house settle and groan in the pre-dawn chill. Outside her small window, the stars were still sharp, brittle points in an indigo sky. She rose in the dark, her stockinged feet silent on the cold plank floor. She dressed by feel, her fingers finding the row of buttons on her plainest wool dress. She moved into the main room, a shadow among shadows. Her first task, her self-appointed first task, was the fire. The great stone hearth was the heart of the house, and in the morning, its heart was cold. She knelt, her hands, still soft from the east, fumbling with the kindling and the dried pine. She was clumsy. The flint and steel felt foreign in her grip, sparking uselessly. She smelled the acrid scent of her own failure, and a familiar, cold frustration began to creep in. A sound behind her, a scrape of a boot on the floor. Shaw Dalton stood by the back door, fully dressed, hat in hand. He had not made a sound. He simply occupied the space, his presence as solid as the log walls. He watched her for a beat, his face unreadable in the gloom. He did not offer to help. He did not criticize. He simply walked past her, his long strides effortless, and set a small, tin teapot on the plank table. He had come from outside, from the well or the barn, and he was already on his way back out, his day having begun hours ago. As he passed the hearth, he set down a small, dry bundle of pitchwood. He placed it just within her reach. Then, he was gone. The door shut with a quiet click, leaving the scent of cold air, horse, and leather. Wren looked at the pitchwood. It was a provision, not a rescue. She took a piece, laid it among her failing kindling, and struck the flint. This time, a spark caught. A tiny, hungry flame licked at the resinous wood and roared to life. Wren sat back on her heels, the sudden warmth chasing the shadows from her face. When she stood, she saw the tin pot he had left. She lifted the lid. The sharp, clean scent of fresh mint leaves, steeped in hot water, rose to meet her. It was not a conversation. It was a habit, a quiet, wordless ritual she had just been made a part of. She poured a cup, the warmth seeping into her hands, and began to measure out the flour for the morning's biscuits. The school began after the breakfast chores were cleared. There was no schoolhouse, no bell, no polished desks. The school was the plank table, scrubbed clean of biscuit crumbs. Or, when the spring sun was high and warm, the front porch. Wren had brought books, but they were not the right books for this. They were not for a life lived on the edge of the wild. So she improvised. She set Poppy, the 3-year-old, on a blanket at her feet with a small tin cup and a handful of dried beans, a task that occupied the child's small, busy hands. For Nora and Huck, she created a classroom from the earth. She took a flat, discarded piece of pine board, charred one side in the fire, and rubbed it clean with a rag. This was their slate. A piece of lumped charcoal, found by the hearth, was their pencil. Numbers are just a way of counting what you have, she told them. She set out a line of wooden buttons from her mending basket. This is 1. This is 2. Nora, at 8, was too old for this. Her eyes were sharp, bordering on suspicious. She already knew her numbers, knew them well enough to count eggs, to measure feed, to know what was owed and what was missing. I can count, Nora said, her voice a flat statement of fact. Good, Wren replied, her tone matching Nora's. Then you can teach Huck. Wren turned her attention to their letters. She took them to the dusty patch of ground by the porch steps and, with a stick, scratched a large cleara in the red dirt. This is how we begin. She worked with Huck, the silent 6-year-old. He would not meet her eyes. His attention was fixed on the small, smooth block of pine in his own hands, the one that was slowly, almost imperceptibly, becoming a horse. He held it so tightly his knuckles were white. Huck, Wren said, her voice soft. She touched his shoulder. He flinched, a small, bird-like motion. She pulled her hand back. Let's just make the letters in the rocks. Find me a stone that looks like a line, now one that looks like a crossbeam. He obeyed, his movements quick and quiet, assembling a crude H from pebbles. He did not look at her, but he listened. Wren gave Nora a different task, from her own valise. She produced a small, precious needle and a length of dark thread. She handed the girl a scrap of burlap, the kind used for mending feed sacks. You can read, Wren said. Now you will write, but you will write with this. Nora took the needle, her brow furrowed. Write what you will write the house, Wren said. She took the charcoal and, on the edge of the porch, wrote HOME. Stitch this, make it solid, make it so it cannot be rubbed away. Nora bent her dark, braided head to the task, her small fingers surprisingly deft, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Wren left her, turning back to the boys, and did not interrupt the girl's fierce focus. Later, as the sun climbed high, Wren sat on the porch step, correcting Huck's crude letters. Poppy, her bean game long forgotten, had crawled into Wren's lap. The child was a solid, living warmth. She had settled in, her head tucked into the crook of Wren's arm, her thumb finding her mouth, her breath a soft, rhythmic puff against Wren's dress. She was asleep. Wren froze. Her body went rigid. This was the thing she was not meant for. This casual, easy intimacy, this small, trusting weight. She was terrified of it. Her arms, which had been teaching, mending, and kneading, were suddenly awkward, stiff. She did not know where to put them. Poppy sighed in her sleep. A small, contented sound, and snuggled deeper. Wren's gaze drifted to Huck. He was still working on his horse, his small knife, a dull-bladed gift from his father, moving with a strange, adult focus. That's a fine horse, Wren said, her voice barely a whisper, not wanting to wake the child in her lap. Huck's hand stopped. He did not look up. He looks fast, Wren continued, studying the carved wood, but he also looks like he knows his way. He knows the way back to the barn. For the first time, the boy's head lifted. He looked at her, a quick, piercing glance from under his tangle of hair. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second. A spark of pure, unguarded surprise. Then he looked down, back at his horse, but a faint, almost invisible smile had touched the corner of his mouth. From the shade of the porch, where he was mending a piece of harness, Shaw Dalton watched. He had been there for 10 minutes, silent, his hands busy with the leather, his body still. He had the stance of a man accustomed to listening for distant thunder, for the first shift of the wind that signaled a storm. He had seen her stiffness when Poppy climbed into her lap. He had seen her uncertainty, and he had seen her stay. He had seen her find the words for his son, words that were not about feelings, but about work, about knowing the way to the barn. He looked down at the leather, pulling the awl through with a sharp, decisive tug. His gaze sometimes lingered at the window of the main room, drawn by the sound of her voice, a new, steady rhythm in the house. It was a rhythm that was not his, but it was not wrong. The new rhythm of the house was broken 2 days later by the clatter of a wagon. A woman, her face as weathered as a wind-blown apple, pulled a single mule to a stop by the gate. She was, Wren guessed, a neighbor. "Ms. Dalton," the woman called out. Wren, who had been hanging laundry on a line, paused, a wooden clothespin in her mouth. She felt a flush creep up her neck. "I'm Miss Calloway. Mr. Dalton is mending the far fence." "Ah." The woman nodded, her eyes taking in Wren, the laundry, the children playing on the porch. "Close enough, I reckon. I'm Sadie. From Dry Creek Fork. Brought you some butter." She hefted a small, muslin-wrapped block. "Heard Shaw had help? Thank the Lord for it. My hens are laying fit to bust." "Figured you could use the eggs." The trade was made. A block of fresh, pale butter for a dozen brown eggs. It was the currency of the frontier, a language of survival. "You'll be careful, dear," Sadie said, her voice dropping, leaning closer over the wagon wheel. "Things are tight," Wren asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "There's a cattle syndicate, men from the East, with Eastern money. They're buying up the small outfits, and those that don't sell—" Sadie glanced toward the high peaks, her face grim. "They find ways to make it hard to stay. They like to press on folks who are on their own, like a man with 3 little ones and no wife." The words hung in the clean, sunny air, a sudden shadow. Sadie clucked to her mule, and with a wave, the wagon rattled away. Wren stood for a moment, the eggs heavy in her basket, the neighbor's warning echoing in her mind. She looked at the house, at the line of small shirts flapping in the wind. That afternoon, she added a new lesson. She brought out the precious paper and the small bottle of ink she had carried from Philadelphia. "We are going to write letters," she announced. "Who?" to Nora asked. "Suspicious. To Mrs. Sadie, to thank her for the butter." Nora scowled. "We gave her eggs. It's not about the trade," Wren said, dipping the pen. "It's about the connection. We write so people know they've been seen. We write so they remember us. It's how a community holds together." She guided Nora's hand, then Huck's, making their marks. It was a seed, a small act of gratitude, planted in the hard soil of the frontier. The days settled into this new shape, the rhythm of the fire, the lessons, the chores, the meals. Wren felt a change in herself. The hollow, aching space inside her, the one defined by the words "I cannot be a mother," was not gone, but it was no longer empty. It was being filled, hour by hour, with the smell of baking bread, the weight of a sleeping child, the scratch of charcoal on a board, the silent thanks of a cup of mint tea. The label that had defined her was fading, replaced by the simple, heavy truth of the work. She was learning to keep house. She was learning to stay. That evening, the air was cool and sweet. Wren sat on the porch step, watching the sky bleed from orange to deep violet. The children were nearby. Poppy was organizing the pebble letters. Nora was practicing her stitches, her work becoming surer, the letters straighter. Wren turned to Nora. "You've mastered home," she said quietly, touching the burlap. "Tomorrow, we'll start on hope." Nora looked up, a question in her sharp eyes, but she nodded. Huck sat a few feet away, working on his horse. He had been struggling with the legs, the wood splitting. He worked in a silent, contained bubble of frustration. Shaw came from the barn, his day's work done. He washed his hands at the outdoor basin, the splash of the water loud in the twilight. He dried his hands on a rag, his movements deliberate. He watched his son for a long moment. Then, he walked over to Huck. He crouched, his large frame folding. He didn't speak, just watched Huck's fumbling hands. Finally, he reached into the sheath on his belt. He drew his own whittling knife. It was not a toy. The blade was sharp, oiled, and well used. It was a tool of survival. He held it out, handle first. Huck's eyes went wide. Shaw closed Huck's small, dirt-caked hand around the grip of the real knife. He closed his own large, calloused hand over his son's, guiding the boy's fingers. "You don't force it," Shaw said, his voice a low rumble. "You follow the grain. You let the wood tell you where to cut." He guided Huck's hand in one long, smooth, shaving cut. A perfect curl of pine fell to the porch. Then, Shaw let go. He stood. Huck stared at the knife in his hand, his face pale with awe and a terrible, wonderful new responsibility. Shaw looked at Wren. His eyes met hers, and in them, she saw not the guarded man from the first night, but something else. Respect. A decision. He nodded toward his son, who was now holding a dangerous tool with a reverence that was almost painful to watch. "Go with Miss Wren," Shaw said. His voice was not for Huck, it was for Wren. "She'll sit with you." He turned and went inside, leaving them in the dying light. Huck scrambled over, his silence absolute, and sat at Wren's feet, the heavy, sharp knife in his hand. Wren did not move. She simply sat, her hands folded in her lap, a guardian of the fire, the home, and now, this small boy with a man's tool. The trust was a heavy, warm weight, more real than any a piece of paper or a word of praise. It had been given, not spoken. Prospector's Crossing was a town built on noise. It was a raw, muddy street gouged out of the valley floor, a temporary-looking collection of false-fronted buildings that served the needs of miners, ranchers, and travelers. On market day, it was a cacophony. The air, usually clean and smelling of pine, was thick with a different kind of scent, the choking dust of 100 horses, the acrid bite of coal smoke from the blacksmith's forge, the sour tang of spilled beer wafting from the saloon doors, and the heavy, metallic smell of fresh-struck silver. The sound was a dull roar, punctuated by the sharp, rhythmic ringing of the smith's hammer, the braying of mules, and the loud, brash arguments of men bartering over the price of flour or the quality of a horse. Wren had walked in, the wagon tied at the edge of town. Shaw was negotiating with the feed and seed merchant, a transaction that required a man's singular focus. He had given Wren a small pouch of coins for necessities. She, Nora, Huck, and Poppy were to buy thread, salt, and perhaps, if the egg money stretched, a small bag of sugar. For the children, the town was an overwhelming spectacle. Nora, her braid pulled tight, walked with a rigid, adult posture, her eyes missing nothing, her hand gripping Poppy's. Huck was a different story. He seemed to shrink with every step, the noise, the shouting. The sheer press of bodies made him fold in on himself. He clutched his small, whittled horse, his head down, his world reduced to the sight of Wren's dusty skirt hem. They stood outside the mercantile, a chaotic storefront with barrels of pickles, bolts of cloth, and stacks of tools spilling onto the boardwalk. Wren was trying to read the chalked list of prices, her lips moving, while holding Poppy's hand. Nora stood guard. Huck was a small, silent satellite, orbiting as close to Wren as he could. A group of local boys, rough and tumble and bored, were loitering by the assayer's office. They were town boys, with the casual cruelty of those who have always belonged somewhere and have never had to fight for it. Their leader, a lanky boy about 10 with a smear of dirt on his cheek, spotted the small, quiet family. He saw their clean, mended, but undeniably homemade clothes. He saw their silence. He saw Huck. The boy sauntered over, his friend snickering behind him. "What's that? Runt?" he taunted, poking a finger toward the wooden horse in Huck's hands. You got a toy? Huck flinched and pressed the horse tighter to his chest, taking a step back so he was hidden behind Wren's skirt. Leave him be, Nora said, her voice small but sharp as a new needle. The boy ignored her, emboldened. He leaned around Wren, his voice carrying in a lull in the forge's hammering. Where's your PA, Runt, or your Mao? That's right. He grinned. A mean, knowing look. You ain't got no PA. And you ain't got no Ma, just old Shaw Dalton, who's too poor to keep a wife. It was a precise, calculated strike. The kind of gossip children overhear from their parents and sharpen into a weapon. A few vendors, a woman selling dried apples and a man leaning on a stack of beaver pelts, heard the exchange. They did not intervene. They merely watched. A faint, amused smirk on their faces, a little sport on a long day. Huck made a small, wounded sound, a hitching in his breath. Wren, who had been frozen for a split second, moved. She did not raise her voice. She did not turn to the boy. She simply became the calmest, most solid point in the entire chaotic street. She set Poppy down, who immediately gripped her dress. She put one hand on the little girl's head, and with the other, she reached for Huck. Her fingers found his small, tense shoulder. She drew him out from behind her, not to expose him, but to stand beside him. He was trembling. She fixed her gaze on the lanky boy. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the street noise like a clean knife. It was the voice of a Philadelphia schoolteacher, clear, precise, and absolutely certain of its authority. This boy, she said, her hand resting firmly on Huck's shoulder, is Huck Dalton, and he is busy. The boy's grin faltered, confused by the response. He ain't busy. He's just standing there. He is with his family, Wren said, her spine so straight she could have been a surveyor's rod. She looked from the boy to the smirking vendors, her gaze sweeping over them, clear and cold as mountain water. The snickers died, replaced by a sudden, awkward interest in their own wares. The boy, desperate to regain his footing, fell back on his first attack. He ain't got a ma. You ain't his ma. Wren's hand tightened on Huck's shoulder. She looked down at Huck, and then back at the boy. When she spoke again, her voice was different. It was not the schoolteacher's voice. It was something new, something forged in the red dirt of the ranch. You're right, she said. The street was quiet around them. I am not his mother. She let the admission hang in the air. The boy looked triumphant. But he is mine, Wren continued, her voice dropping, yet gaining a strange new weight. He is mine on market day. He is mine on wash day. He is mine on the days he is sick. And the days he is strong, he is mine on the important days. She paused, then delivered the final, binding sentence. A public claim, and every single day is important. A profound, heavy silence settled on their small patch of the street. The mother of the lanky boy, a weary-looking woman in a flour sack apron, suddenly appeared from the mercantile. She had heard the last part. Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. Emile, she hissed, grabbing her son's ear. What did I tell you about bothering folks? Get on. Get. She pulled the boy away, who was now a muttering, embarrassed child. Not a bully. The woman gave Wren a harried, half-apologetic, half-resentful look. Sorry, ma'am. He's a handful. She dragged him down the street. Wren watched them go. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she was afraid it was visible. She felt dizzy, but she stood still, her hand on Huck, her other on Poppy, Nora, who had not said a word, who had stood like a small soldier, silently reached into the pocket of her dress. She drew out a single, small coin. It was a nickel. Wren knew, instinctively, that it was the girl's only money, a coin she had perhaps been saving for weeks for a piece of candy or a hair comb. Nora pressed the coin into Wren's palm. Wren looked down, confused. For Poppy, Nora whispered, her voice fierce, her sharp eyes glistening with an emotion Wren couldn't name. Buy a ribbon for her hair, a blue one, so she knows she's been seen. Wren's throat tightened. She closed her fingers around the warm, small coin. It was not a purchase. It was a sacrament. "I will," she whispered back. A bright blue one, across the street, leaning against a hitching post outside the blacksmith's shop. Shaw Dalton had seen it all. He had seen the boys approach. He had seen his son flinch. He had seen Wren step forward. His hand had tightened on the post, his knuckles going white. He had made a half move to cross the street, to end it, to bring the weight of his presence crashing down on that small, mean boy. But he had stopped. He had stopped, and he had watched. He had watched this woman from the East, this woman who claimed she could not be a mother, stand in the middle of a public street and claim his children. He had watched her do it not with force, but with words, with a stillness that was more powerful than any man's shout. He had seen her win. When Wren finally looked up, her eyes searching the crowd, she found his... He was too far away for her to read his expression, but he did not need one. He simply, almost imperceptibly, nodded. Once, it was a confirmation. It was an affirmation. It said, "That's right." He turned and walked into the blacksmith shop. The matter concluded. As the small crowd dispersed, their moment of street theater over, another man, who had been standing on the steps of the Territorial Land Office, made a note in a small, leather-bound book. He was not a rancher. He was not a miner. He was, from his polished boots to his clean-shaven face and his derby hat, a man of paper and ink. His suit was dark, well-cut, and conspicuously free of dust. He had observed the entire exchange with a mild, academic interest. His name was Edwin Pike, a registrar for the territory, and his business was order. He looked at Wren, at the three children, made a final note, and snapped his book shut. He, too, had seen them. The ride home was quiet. The new blue ribbon in Poppy's hair was a flash of defiant color against the muted landscape. That night, after supper, Wren sat at the plank table, nursing a cup of mint tea. The children were supposed to be in their beds. The house was quiet. The fire banked. She was exhausted. The adrenaline of the day having left her feeling hollow and shaky. A small shadow appeared at her elbow. It was Huck. He was in his nightshirt, in his hands. He held his wooden horse. He said nothing, just stood beside her. "Huck, you should be asleep," she said softly. He placed the horse on the table beside her tin cup. It was the finished horse, the one he had worked on, the one his father had trusted him with the sharp knife to complete. It was smooth now, the legs delicate but strong, the head arched. He pushed it toward her. "For me?" Wren asked, confused. "Oh, Huck, I can't. This is yours." He shook his head, a quick, jerky motion. He looked up, and his eyes, clear and dark, met hers. He spoke, his voice rusty from disuse, a quiet, gravelly whisper. "He only runs when you lead the way." He then turned, his bare feet padding on the floor, and vanished into the darkness of the children's sleeping alcove. Wren stared at the small, perfect horse. She picked it up. It was warm from his hands. She felt her heart, which had been so heavy in the town, suddenly feel full, a heavy, solid, steady weight. She had been seen? She looked out the window, but she was not seeing the dark corral. She was seeing the man in the derby hat, the one who had been watching, the one who had been riding. She had been seen, yes, but she had also been noted. The American flag on the post office, which she had glimpsed as they left, had been snapping in the wind, a bright symbol of new beginnings. But as she sat in the quiet, fire-lit cabin, the small wooden horse in her hand, Wren Calloway knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that the next wind to blow through Silver Basin would be a much, much colder one. The wind changed in the middle of the afternoon. It had been a bright, clear day. The sky an uninterrupted sheet of high country blue. Then, around 3 o'clock, the first cold gust came down from the peaks, smelling of ice and altitude. It hit the house with a low, mournful sound, rattling the single window in Wren's room and sending a plume of ash puffing from the hearth. Wren was in the main room, helping Huck with his letters, while Poppy slept in a nest of blankets by the fire. Nora had been on the porch, working on her embroidery. She had taken to the task with a fierce, quiet pride. Another gust of wind hit, harder this time, slamming the heavy front door with a crack that shook the house. "My goodness," Wren said, standing and rubbing her arms. "That's a mean wind. Nora, come inside. Dear, it's too cold to be out." She walked to the door and pulled it open. The porch was empty. At first, there was no alarm, just confusion. The porch was Nora's domain. Wren looked out at the corrals, thinking the girl might have gone to see her father, who was mending a section of fence. "Nora," she called again, her voice snatched by the wind. There was no answer, only the high, thin shriek of the wind through the eaves. Then Wren saw it, lying on the rough planking of the porch, abandoned, was Nora's sunbonnet, and next to it, her small, round embroidery hoop. The burlap was stretched tight. The needle, threaded with red, was still stuck in the fabric, as if she had been pulled away in the middle of a stitch. A cold, sharp blade of fear, colder than the wind, slid into Wren's stomach. Nora never went anywhere without her bonnet, and she never would have left her sewing. It was her prize, her mark of status. "Nora," Wren called, her voice now sharp, frantic. She stepped back inside, her mind racing. Huck, where did Nora go? Huck, who had been focused on his charcoal, looked up, his eyes wide with a shared, sudden fear. He shook his head. He didn't know. Poppy stirred in her sleep, her small face untroubled. Wren ran back out, scanning the vast, empty landscape. The ranch sat in a wide basin, but the land was broken, full of arroyos, stands of trees, and rising canyon walls. A child could vanish in 5 minutes. Shaw Wren screamed, cupping her hands. "Shaw!" She ran to the corner of the house, her skirts whipping around her legs. She saw him. He had heard the panic in her voice. He was already vaulting the fence, not taking the time to go to the gate. His tools dropped in the dirt. He ran toward her, his long strides eating up the ground. "What is it?" he panted, his eyes already scanning, looking for fire, for blood. "It's Nora," Wren said, her voice trembling. "She's gone." She left her bonnet and her sewing. "She's just gone." Shaw's face, which she had only ever seen in expressions of calm or quiet observation, became a mask of terrible, focused intensity. He didn't question. He didn't panic. He moved. "Huck," he roared, his voice a different thing entirely, a command that shook the air. The boy tumbled out onto the porch, his small face pale. "Where did she go? Which way?" Shaw demanded. "Huck," his eyes filling with tears, just pointed. A trembling finger aimed toward the rising ground, toward the scrub oak and pine that led to Dry Creek Fork. Shaw's eyes narrowed. He looked at the ground by the porch steps. Huck was there, on his knees, scratching in the red dirt. He was drawing small, frantic lines. Not letters, arrows, one after another, all pointing the same way. Wren looked down, her heart stopping. Oh, Huck. Shaw saw it too. His face tightened. He looked at the horizon, at the darkening, wind-torn sky. He wiped his hands on his trousers, a slow, deliberate motion, as if cleaning them of a simple chore before starting a complex one. "She's not running away," he said, his voice a low, hard rumble. It was to himself, not to Wren. "She's going to prove something." He turned to Wren. "You stay. Watch the other two. Bar the door." "No." The word was out of her mouth before she could think. It was sharp, absolute. "No, I'm coming. She left because of me." Shaw looked at her. He saw the frantic guilt in her eyes, the terror, but also the same unbending stillness she'd had in town. He didn't have time to argue. "Fine," he said. "Saddle the bay. I'll get the roan." He was already moving toward the barn. "Huck, you are in charge of Poppy. You bar that door. You do not open it until we are back. You understand me. You are the man of the house. You keep her safe." Huck nodded, his small body rigid with the terrible weight of the duty. He grabbed Poppy's sleeping form and dragged her, blankets and all, inside. The bar slid home with a heavy, wooden thud. The ride was a blur of violence, The wind tore at them. They didn't take the wagon trail. Shaw plunged his horse. The big roan straight into a dense grove of aspens, a shortcut that was a treacherous maze of white trunks and rattling, golden leaves. Wren, on the smaller bay, was a terrible rider. She was a woman of sidewalks and carriages, but she clung to the saddle horn, her face lashed by branches, her breath coming in sobs. She heard me. Wren cried out, her voice torn from her by a jolt. They were moving at a fast, dangerous trot, heard what Shaw called back, his eyes fixed on the trail, which was no trail at all, just a path of instinct. After town, that night, she asked me about being a mother, about the words I said when I arrived. Wren's confession came out in broken pieces, punctuated by the horse's gait. I told her the truth. I told her I couldn't be one, that my body was broken. I told her I wasn't her mother. I thought I was being honest. I thought it was the right thing, to set the truth straight. Shaw said nothing. He just kept riding, his back a rigid wall of homespun shirt. "She's out here," Wren sobbed, "because I told her she was motherless. I did the same thing as that bully in town. I did it. Oh, God, Shaw, I did it." He reined in his horse so suddenly that Wren's bay nearly crashed into him. He turned in the saddle. His face was grim, but his eyes were not angry. They were filled with the terrible, aching clarity of the high country light. "This land doesn't care what you said," he bit out. "It only cares what you do. Now, stop crying. You're no good to her crying. Look," he pointed, not at the ground, but at a branch, a single, bright red thread, snagged on the bark of an aspen. It was the thread from Nora's needle. "She came this way," he said. He kicked his horse forward, moving with a new, certain purpose. The trail was clearer to him now. He was not just following the land. He was following the mind of his daughter. The thread led them out of the aspens and onto a rocky incline, a place of boulders and sparse, twisted pines. They followed the tracks of small, desperate boots, visible only to a man who had lived his life reading the earth. He pointed to a massive, split boulder, the lightning rock. "She knows this place. We used to come here before her mother left, before the silence settled on the house. They had to leave the horses. The ground was too steep. Shaw tied them, and they climbed, Wren's thin-soled boots slipping on the granite. The wind was louder here, a physical force that tried to push them from the rock. Nora Shaw's voice was the only thing stronger than the wind. Nora, a small sound, a whimper, or just the wind in a pine. "There," Shaw said, pointing. It was a small alcove, a hollow in the rock, shielded from the worst of the wind, a child's hiding place. Wren's heart was in her throat. She scrambled ahead of Shaw, pulling herself up over the last ledge. Nora was there. She was huddled into a small, tight ball, her face buried in her knees. She was shaking, not from the cold, but from the force of her own sobs. Her hands were raw and red, and clutched in her lap was the embroidery hoop. Wren fell to her knees in front of the child. "Nora, oh, Nora, you're safe, you're safe." Nora wouldn't look up. She just wept, terrible, dry, racking sobs. Wren reached for her, and Nora flinched, not from fear of being hit, but from a deeper, more profound hurt. "I came to get you," Wren whispered. Why, Nora's voice was a muffled, broken thing, thick with tears. "You're not my mother." The words were a blade, the same one Wren herself had forged. "Nora, look at me," Wren pleaded. Slowly, the girl raised her head. Her face was a mess of tear tracks and dirt. Her sharp, intelligent eyes were swollen and red, but they were blazing. She held up the embroidery hoop. Wren looked. In the center, in Nora's neat, practiced stitches, was the word home, and just below it, in the corner, was a new word, stitched with the frantic, clumsy haste of a breaking heart. The letters were crooked, the stitches uneven, the red thread a bloody gash against the plain burlap. It said, "Stay, if you can't be a mother," Nora whispered, the question a raw, desperate accusation. Why does it keep feeling like you are? It was a lash, but a warm one. A question that stripped away all of Wren's defenses, all the lies she had told herself, all the pain she had hidden behind. Wren didn't have an answer, not a spoken one. She just acted. She pulled the child into her arms, pulling her so hard against her chest that Nora let out a gasp. Wren wrapped her arms around the girl's thin, shaking body, holding her with a desperate, claiming strength. She buried her face in Nora's tangled, dark hair, and her own tears, the ones she had held back, finally came. "You're right," Wren whispered, her voice thick. "It's not blood. The blood doesn't choose us, but we choose. We choose each other, and I choose you. Nora, I choose you." Nora, who had been rigid, suddenly collapsed. Her small arms, which had been clutching the hoop, let it fall. They came up and locked around Wren's neck, her fingers digging into Wren's dress, holding on as if she were drowning. And she was. They both had been. Shaw had stood at the mouth of the alcove. He had not moved. He had watched it all, his face unreadable, his hat in his hands. He had given Wren the space to do what he could not. His own apologies were buried too deep, his own grief too raw to be of any use. He was a man of mending fences and reading the sky. This was a different kind of mending. He watched them, the woman from the east and his sharp, broken daughter, clinging to each other on a cold rock. A strange, new, and fiercely complete family. After a long time, the sobbing eased. The wind was still howling, and the light was beginning to fail, the sun painting the clouds in angry shades of purple and red. "We have to go," Shaw said, his voice quiet, but firm. Wren nodded, her face still buried in Nora's hair. She loosened her grip. Shaw stepped forward. He did not say, "Are you all right?" He did not say, "You scared us." He did not say anything. He simply reached down and, with one sure, steady arm, he lifted his daughter, Nora, exhausted, settled against his chest, her head tucking into the familiar space under his chin. Shaw turned, his daughter in his arms, and looked at Wren. He offered his free hand. Wren took it. His grip was hard, calloused, and absolutely steady. He pulled her to her feet. He kept Nora. Wren bent and picked up the fallen embroidery hoop, the word "stay" staring up at her. The three of them went back down the mountain, one family, walking in the low, dying light. Shaw carried the child, and Wren carried the work, the promise. They rode back in silence, slower this time. Nora bundled in front of her father, wrapped in his canvas coat. When they got back to the house, the door was unbarred. Huck stood there, his small face a mask of old man worry, Poppy asleep on her feet behind him. When he saw them, he did not cheer. He just let out a long, shuddering breath and stepped aside to let them in. That night, long after the children were asleep, Wren stood on the porch, listening to the world. The wind had died down, leaving a profound, clean silence. The only sounds were the distant rush of Dry Creek Fork, its water still high, and the soft, steady breathing of the house behind her. She thought of her apology, the one she had sobbed into the wind. It felt small, but it felt true. It had mixed with the sound of the pines and been carried away, leaving this new, quiet peace in its place, the peace of the high country morning, which had felt so complete the night before, lasted exactly until 10 o'clock. The sun was high and warm, a false promise of an easy day. Wren was outside, showing Nora how to hang a laundry line so the wind, not gravity, did most of the work. Poppy was asleep, and Huck was, as always, on the porch, his small, whittled horse in one hand, the sharp knife in the other, guarding his world. A rider appeared, not a rancher, not a miner. The horse was a fine black gelding, too clean for this part of the territory. The man on its back was Edwin Pike. He wore the same dark suit and derby hat he had worn in Prospector's Crossing. He dismounted, his movements economical, his polished boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt by the trough. He did not tie his horse, but merely looped the reins over the hitching post, as if he did not intend to stay long. Shaw came from the barn. He had been mending a bridle. He held the leather straps in his hand. He did not walk to greet Pike. He simply stood, waiting. A solid, unmoving presence. Pike tipped his hat, a gesture that was more of a formality than a greeting. "Mr. Dalton, Miss Calloway." His eyes registered her, and the recognition was cold. "Pike," Shaw said. "It was not a question. I'm here on official territorial business." "Mr. Dalton," Pike said. His voice was a flat, nasal monotone, the voice of a man who read ledgers. He pulled a folded sheaf of papers from his inside coat pocket. "It has come to the attention of the registrar's office that 3 minor children, Nora, Huckleberry, and Poppy Dalton, are residing at this location." "They are," Shaw said. The wind played with a loose strand of Wren's hair. "And it has come to our attention," Pike continued, "that their mother, one Elspeth Dalton, abandoned this claim over 8 months ago." "She left," Shaw said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Indeed. Which leaves the children without a legal maternal guardian. And, given the instability of your own claim, Mr. Dalton, the territory must intervene." Wren felt the blood drain from her face. She took a step forward. "Instability? What are you talking about? This is their home." Pike turned his gaze to her. It was dismissive. "Miss Calloway, I have here a formal notice of review. A hearing will be set, based on my preliminary investigation. These 3 children have no legally recognized guardian." Shaw took a step forward, the leather in his hand creaking. "I am their father." "Are you?" Pike's smile was a thin, unpleasant line. "Our records show no formal adoption. No guardianship papers filed. They were, I believe, your wife's children from a prior arrangement. You are, in the eyes of the law, simply the man she was living with. You have no blood tie." The words hit the air with the force of a physical blow. PKE then looked at Wren. "And you, ma'am, have even less. You are a hired woman. You have no standing, no blood tie. You are, legally, a stranger." Wren found her voice. It was shaking, but it was hot. "I am the one who found Nora on the mountain. I am the one who teaches Huck his letters. I am the one Poppy calls for. That is not a blood tie, that is a life tie. The law comes after affection, Mr. Pike, not before it." "On the contrary, Miss Calloway," Pike said, his voice as cold as a winter lock. "The law comes before everything. It is the only thing that separates this territory from chaos. Affection is a variable. The law is a constant." He unfolded the paper. "This is a notice to appear, at which point the territorial court will likely place the children in the orphan's home at Pueblo, pending a more permanent solution." Pueblo. The word was a sentence, a death. "You can't," Wren whispered. "I can," Pike said. He looked back at Shaw. "This is, of course, a preliminary notice, but the hearing will be set. Good day." He did not offer the paper. He walked to the porch, past the silent, staring Huck, and he tucked the notice into the jamb of the front door, a white scar against the dark wood. He mounted his horse, adjusted his hat, and rode away at a neat, unhurried trot. For a full minute, no one moved. The only sound was the wind, the snap of the laundry on the line, and the frantic, sudden hammering of Wren's heart. Shaw turned and, with a single, violent motion, hurled the bridle he was holding into the dirt. He strode to the door and ripped the paper from the jamb. He stared at it, his face a dark thundercloud. Wren whispered, coming to his side. "What does he mean? No papers. What does he mean? Instability." Shaw crumpled the paper in his massive fist. "He means Luther Voss." "The name, Sadie's warning. The cattle baron. Voss wants this land," Shaw said, his voice a low growl of fury. "He wants this basin. He wants this water. And Pike is his man, his paper man. Voss buys the land, or he scares people off it. And for those of us who won't scare," he looked at the crumpled paper, his shame and rage a palpable thing, "he sends his legal dogs. But the papers. Shaw, the adoption. Why didn't you file them?" Shaw turned away from her. He walked to the porch railing and gripped it, his knuckles white. He looked out at the land, his land, which was suddenly no longer his. "I tried. he said, his voice ragged. After she left, I went to the land office. I went to file for guardianship, to make them mine, on paper, the way they were already mine, in my heart. He struck the railing with his open palm. And Voss was there. He knew. He has eyes everywhere. He told me, right there in the registrar's office, that it was a complicated process. That papers get lost. That a man alone, with no wife, with no blood claim. He said the court would see me as unfit. He said he'd make sure of it. He said if I tried to file, he would file against me, claim the children were neglected, and have them taken away then. He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a frustrated, trapped animal's pain. He threatened to break my home. So I waited. I thought if I just worked, if I built the fences, if I saved the money, if I kept the children safe, I thought the work would be enough. I thought the work would be the proof. He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred from that work. But it's not. He was right. A man like me. I know how to fight with a post-hole digger. I know how to fight a blizzard. Or a coyote. I don't know how to fight a man in a clean suit who uses paper as a weapon. Wren looked at him, and the last of her fear was burned away by a cold, sharp, righteous anger. She was a woman from Philadelphia. She was a woman of letters, and she knew paper. Then you'll learn, she said. He looked at her, confused. You don't know how to fight with paper, she said, her voice the steel she had found in town. I do. That is my fight. He wants paper. We will give him a flood of it. He wants a blood tie. We will show him a tie that's stronger. She marched into the house, Shaw following her. The children, who had been silent witnesses, huddled by the door. Wren grabbed her small, precious box of paper and her bottle of ink. She slammed them down on the plank table. He said the law is a constant. She said, her eyes flashing. He's wrong. The law is paper, and paper is written by people, so we will write our own. Shaw, you will write your statement. You will write down every day you have provided for them, every fence you mended, every meal you hunted. Wren, I can't. You will. I will help you. And the children. She turned to Nora and Huck. You two, you will write your own. You will be your own witnesses. Nora looked terrified. Write what, Miss Wren? You will write your truth. You will write about this house. You will write about your father. You will write about being found. A new, hard light came into Nora's eyes. She did not go for the paper. She went to her mending basket. She pulled out a clean, white square of muslin, her best piece. She threaded her needle. She was not going to write. She was going to sew. She sat down, her back straight, and her needle began to fly. She was stitching a new line. Home is where people stay. Wren turned to Huck. He was shaking. Huck, can you write your testimony? He shook his head, his eyes huge. He could not form those words. Not yet. Then don't write, Wren said, her voice softening. Draw. You are the man of this house. You know its secret places. Draw me this house. Draw me a map of your life here. He looked at her, a flicker of understanding. He grabbed a piece of the precious paper and the charcoal pencil. He did not draw the house. He drew the land. He drew the barn, the creek, the aspens, the lightning rock. And then, in the center, by the hearth, he drew a small, crude circle. He pointed to it. Poppy. He whispered. Safe. He was marking Poppy's safe place. Yes, Wren said, her throat tight. That is your testimony. She sat down, and I will write mine. I will write what I saw in town. I will write what I see here, and then we will get more. She looked at Shaw, the community, Sadie, the man who delivers the mail, the blacksmith. We will collect testimonials. We will build a wall of paper so high that Man Pike cannot climb it. The task energized them. It was no longer a house of fear. It was an office of war. For 3 days, they worked. Shaw sat at the table at night, his large hand cramping around the pen, as Wren dictated his own life back to him, pulling the memories from him. Nora stitched her truth into the cloth. Huck drew his map, adding details with a ferocious, architectural precision. On the 4th day, Wren rode to the mailbox at the crossroads, half a mile away. It was a lonely box on a post, serving 3 ranches. She had mailed her own letters, a request for help, to Sadie and to the blacksmith. She opened the small, tin door. She had not expected anything. There were 3 letters inside. The first was from Sadie, the widow from Dry Creek Fork. Her note was scrawled on a piece of wrapping paper. Missa Calloway, I heard Pike was up your way. That man is a snake in a suit. Luther Voss is a bully. You tell Shaw he ain't alone. My wagon is his, any day he needs it. And here is my word. Shaw Dalton is a better father than most, and a better man than all. You put my name to that. The second was from the Sawyer, a man Wren had never met. Mr. Dalton, I heard Voss is leaning. I owe you for the winter of '75. When you pulled my mule from the ice, my saw and my rifle are yours. And my word, that house is a good house. The third was from the postman himself. It was not a letter. It was a package. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick stack of blank, official-looking paper from the land office. With it, a stub of a pencil and a note. Miss Paper seems to be the weapon. Here is some ammunition. It fell off my wagon. Use it well. A friend. Wren rode back, the letters clutched in her hand, tears blurring the trail. They were not alone. She burst into the house, holding the letters aloft. Shaw, look what we have. He read them, his face impassive, but his shoulders, which had been slumped in defeat, straightened. He looked at Wren, at the ink stain on her finger, at the fierce, bright hope in her eyes. He took a deep breath. He picked up his hat. He looked at his children, at their work. He looked at his home. I am used to fighting with my hands, he said, his voice quiet, but clear. I am used to fighting with work. I don't know this paper fight. It's not my way. Wren's face fell. But, he continued, and he put his hand over hers on the table. I am learning. This time, we do both. We'll do the work, and we'll do the paper. The next day, Pike returned. He rode up just as Shaw and Wren were mending the very fence Shaw had been at when Nora disappeared. A courtesy call, Pike said, not dismounting. The hearing has been set. The circuit judge will be here in 12 days. He looked at their work, at the solid new posts Shaw was setting. He looked at Wren, who stood beside him, her hands dirty, her gaze steady. 12 days, Pike repeated. He smiled, a faint, almost invisible lifting of one corner of his mouth. It was the smile of a man who had already calculated the odds, had already counted the votes, had already won. He turned his fine, black horse and rode away, leaving them with the deadline. A ticking clock that sounded as loud as a hammer blow in the vast, silent basin. The sky, which had been a clear, hard blue for a week, turned a sickly, greenish gray. The 12-day deadline was half gone, and the air had become a thick, suffocating weight. The wind died. The birds stopped singing. An oppressive, waiting silence fell over the silver basin, a silence so profound it was louder than any noise. Wren, standing on the porch, felt the first drop. It was not a gentle spring rain. It was a single, fat, cold drop that struck her forearm with a splat. A moment later, another. And then, as if a celestial bucket had been upended, the sky tore open. This was not rain. This was a deluge. It came down not in drops, but in solid, gray sheets, a wall of water that instantly turned the dry, red dirt of the compound into a thick, clinging slurry. The sound was a deafening roar, a constant, pounding drum on the roof that made speech impossible. Shaw was at the barn, trying to secure the 2 horses. Wren, her heart suddenly pounding with a new, primal fear, ran inside. The children were there, their faces pale, their eyes wide, huddled by the hearth as if its small, sputtering fire could protect them. Huck, Nora, stay with Poppy, Wren shouted over the din, which was already like a locomotive inside the house. Water was already finding its way under the door, a dark, spreading stain on the plank floor. The true danger, however, was not the rain. It was the creek, Dry Creek Fork, which for 10 months of the year was a placid, ankle-deep stream, was fed by a dozen smaller, steeper canyons above the ranch. It was a natural drainage for half the mountain, and it was rising. Wren could see it from the window, no longer a clear, meandering stream, but a churning, brown, and angry river, already spilling its banks. It was chewing at the soft dirt, carrying with it bushes, rocks, and the sound of a low, terrible growl. Wren Shaw's voice, a roar that barely cut through the storm. He was at the back door, his clothes plastered to him, his face a grim mask. The lower fence. It's going to go. If it goes. The horses. I'll watch the children, she yelled back. But as she turned, a new sound joined the roar of the rain. It was a sound that did not belong, a lowing, frantic, terrified sound, the sound of cattle, and below it, the pop-pop-pop of gunshots, sharp and thin against the storm's base. Wren and Shaw locked eyes, the same sickening realization dawning on them both. Voss. Shaw breathed, the name a curse. It was not a natural disaster. It was a man-made one. Luther Voss's men, using the cover of the storm, were driving a herd of cattle, hundreds of them, down the narrow cut, using the flash flood as a weapon. They were aiming them, like a loaded gun, directly at the weak point in Shaw's land, directly at the creek, knowing the combined force of the flood and the stampede would wipe out his fences, his barn, perhaps the house itself. It was a brutal, brilliant, and utterly depraved move. The children, Shaw bellowed, turning to run, not for the fence, but for the house. But he was too late. Huck, hearing the cattle, hearing the strange, high-pitched whistles, had done the one thing he was taught to do: check the stock. He had run out the back door just as Shaw was running in, a small, fast shadow, heading for the small pen where he kept his own 2 goats. Huck Wren screamed. The boy was 50 yards from the house. He was standing by the small, 2-rail fence of the goat pen, his back to the house, looking up the canyon. And he was looking directly at the wall of death that was coming for him. A solid, churning mass of brown water, 6 feet high, was surging down the arroyo. And in the middle of it, fighting for purchase, was a wave of terrified cattle, their eyes white, their horns locked, running from the gunfire behind them. Huck froze. He was a small, still point in a world of violent motion. Shaw Wren shrieked. Shaw saw it. He ran, his boots sucking at the mud, his lariat already in his hand, but he was too far. He would never make it. Wren did not think. She did not calculate. She moved. She ran from the porch, launching herself into the driving, horizontal rain. She was a city woman, in a city woman's shoes, but she ran with a speed she did not know she possessed. The first of the cattle hit the fence line, which exploded into splinters. The wall of water and beasts was 100 yards away. 50. Huck was still frozen. His small, whittled horse, which he must have had in his pocket, clutched in his hand. "Huck, run!" Wren screamed, but her voice was nothing. Shaw was running parallel, on the high side of the barn, trying to get ahead of the herd, to turn them. He was coiling his rope, his face a mask of superhuman focus. Wren reached the goat pen just as the first wave of muddy water surged around her ankles, cold and shockingly powerful. It almost knocked her from her feet. Huck was trapped. The fence post he was clinging to was now an island, and the main, churning current was cutting him off from the house. Wren plunged in. The water was at her knees, then her waist. It was full of debris. A branch struck her leg. Hard, but she didn't feel it. Huck, she grabbed him. She grabbed his small, thin arm and pulled him, but he was locked in terror. She slapped his face, a sharp, hard crack. "Huck, come." He blinked. He saw her. She shoved him toward the house, but the water was too deep, the current too fast. They would be swept away. The fence, she screamed. The fence he had been clinging to. It was the only thing. She pushed him up. "Climb, get on top." He scrambled up, his small boots finding purchase. He was on the top rail, but the water was rising. It was already licking the rail, and the main body of the herd was coming. Shaw, from the high ground, saw what she was doing. He saw his son, perched on the fence, a perfect target for the panicked, surging cattle. He was still too far to rope him. Wren slid under the rail, the muddy water up to her chest. She was on the inside of the fence, between Huck and the coming herd. "Hold on," she screamed. She found a coil of rope, a short length Huck had used for his goats. With hands that were numb and clumsy, her fingers tearing, she tied his ankle to the thickest part of the post. "Miss Wren, no!" he cried, his voice finally coming back. "Hold on!" she roared. The herd was on them. A huge red steer, its eyes blind with terror, slammed into the section of fence just yards from them. The wood snapped. Shaw was there. He had made it. He was on his horse now, which was rearing, terrified. He was in the water, his lariat singing. He roped one of the led steers, pulling its head, trying to break the momentum, to turn the herd away from the house, toward the open pasture. He was a small, human anchor against a ton of panicked beef. His horse was dragged, skidding, in the mud, but it held. He turned the first one. The second followed. He had split the tide, but not all of them. A dozen steers, pushed by the water, broke through the collapsing fence, charging straight for the goat pen. Wren looked up. She saw the wall of horns and mud. She had nowhere to go. She did not run. She did not scream. She turned, her back to the herd, and she wrapped her body around the base of the post Huck was tied to. She covered as much of him as she could, making herself a shield. Wren Shaw's voice was a sound of pure agony. She squeezed her eyes shut. She smelled the mud, the rain, the terror of the animals. A red and white splotch of color, a flash of movement. From the house, it was Nora. She was standing on the porch, soaked, her small face a pale, determined O. In her hands was a long pole, a bean pole from the garden, and tied to the end of it was a flash of red. Her embroidery, her red thread, her stay. She was waving it. She was waving it wildly. Not at the cattle, but at the house, near where Poppy, who had woken up, was now standing in the open doorway, crying. Nora was a tiny, fierce general, holding her standard, a beacon, creating a point of noise and color to turn the cattle away from the house, away from the sleeping quarters, the steers, their attention diverted by the flashing red and the new, high-pitched shrieks from Nora. Veered. They split. 6 going one way, 6 the other, charging past the post, past Wren and Huck, their hooves churning the mud just inches from where Wren was pressed. Wren felt the wind of their passage, the spray of mud and water. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The main herd was past, turned by Shaw, their red backs disappearing into the rain. The floodwaters, no longer dammed by the cattle, surged past and began to recede, their level dropping. There was only the sound of the rain and the sobbing of a small boy. Wren was caked in mud, from her hair to her feet. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand. She unwrapped her arms from the post. Her hands were raw, bleeding, full of splinters. She fumbled with the knot she had tied, her fingers useless. She pulled out the small whittling knife that was always in her pocket now. It was Huck's. She sawed at the rope. Huck fell from the post into her arms. He was not crying. He was just shaking, a small, cold, rigid body. Wren collapsed, sitting in the thick, red mud, the water still swirling around her waist. She pulled Huck into her lap, cradling him like he was a baby, like he was Poppy. She wrapped her arms around him, and she began to rock, back and forth, her own body's rhythm against his, her cheek pressed to his wet, cold hair. "You're safe," she whispered, over and over, her voice a cracked, broken thing. "It's all right. I have you. You're safe." She was patting his back, a steady, rhythmic beat, as if she were trying to restart a heart that had stopped. Shaw rode up, his horse limping, his own face as pale as death. He looked at Wren, sitting in the mud, covered in filth, bleeding, holding his son. He looked at Nora, still on the porch, her red flag drooping, shaking with cold. He looked at Poppy, crying in the doorway. He slid off his horse, his legs buckling for a second. He just stood there, his hat gone, his hair plastered to his head, his lariat trailing in the water. A single horseman appeared on the ridge. He was not wet. He had been watching, from a safe, dry distance, under the cover of the pines. It was Luther Voss. He was a large man, on a large, fine horse. He rode down part way, not into the mud, but close enough. He was smiling. A bad bit of weather. "Dalton," he called out, his voice a rich, easy baritone that carried over the rain. "Looks like you lost your fence. Looks like your creek's running a bit high." Shaw said nothing. He just stared, his hands clenching and unclenching. Voss's smile widened. He looked at the destroyed fence, the churned-up mud, the exhausted, broken family. He looked at Wren, a picture of filth and ruin, clutching the boy. "Pity," Voss said. "A judge is going to look at this. He's going to see a man who can't control his stock, can't even keep his children safe from a spring shower. He's going to see a ruin." He tipped his hat, a gesture of mock courtesy. "Don't worry, the law will take care of the rest." He turned his horse, but as he did, a small object, dislodged by the movement, fell from his heavy, oiled slicker. It was a small, dark red disc, and it fell into the one patch of mud that was not yet churned, leaving a clear, perfect impression. Voss didn't notice. He rode away, whistling. Shaw took a step, a low, animal growl rising in his throat. "Shaw." "No." Wren's voice. It was quiet, but it stopped him. He turned. She was still on the ground, but she was looking, not at him, but at the mud where Voss had been. Voss's boot print, the one from his custom, expensive boots, was pressed deep, and next to it, gleaming in the mud, was the object he had dropped. Wren, still holding Huck, crawled. She crawled on her hands and knees through the filth, and she picked it up. It was a small, round cake of sealing wax, the kind a man like Pike would use for official documents, and pressed into it, as a seal, was the small, distinct shape of a pea. She held it up, the rare, priceless piece of evidence, the proof that tied Voss to Pike. Night fell. The house was cold, the fire almost dead. They were all inside, wrapped in every blanket they owned. Wren had washed the children, her hands shaking, and now they were all by the hearth, their bodies close. She had washed Huck's face, and her own, and Shaw's. She had cleaned their wounds with small, careful, tender motions, her hands moving with a purpose that defied the day's terror. The firelight flickered on 4 wet, pale faces. They had survived. The house had survived. They were bruised. They were cold. They were terrified, but they were all of them, still there. The sound of the cattle was long gone. The sound of the flood was receding. All that was left was the sound of the rain, and the soft, steady, shared breathing of the children. Finally, safely, asleep. The house had passed another test. The aftermath of the flood was a new kind of war. The first battle had been against water and terror. This one was against time. They had 6 days. The ranch was a ruin of mud. The lower corral was gone. The goat pen was splinters, and a thick, toxic-smelling layer of silt covered everything. But the house had held. The family had held. The storm had passed, and the sun now beat down with a kind of cruel, indifferent brightness, baking the red mud into a hard, cracked shell. The kitchen table was not a school, and it was not a dining table. It was a war room. Wren had laid out their weapons, and they looked small. The small, red disc of sealing wax with its P initial, the handful of letters from Sadie and the Sawyer, Huck's map, Nora's embroidery. "It's not enough," Wren said, her voice hoarse. She had not really slept. "We have circumstance. We have goodwill. We need— wait." Shaw, who had been splinting the leg of his horse, walked in, his face grim. The flood had changed him. He no longer looked at Wren as a helper. He looked at her as a partner, a fellow soldier. Voss won't be beat by goodwill. Wren, he'll be beat by fear, or by law. And he owns the law in this county. Then we have to find a law he doesn't own, she said. We have to go beyond the county. She picked up the stack of clean, official paper the postman had given her. I'm writing out. You and the children, you clean. Make this place look not like a ruin, but like a home that's fighting. I'll gather the rest of the army. She rode for 2 days. She rode until her body was a single, humming ache. She did not just ask for letters. She took sworn, written testimony. She found the blacksmith in Prospector's Crossing, his face streaked with soot. He stopped his hammer when he saw her. Heard you had a washout. Miss, we had a visitor, Mr. O'Malley, and we have a court date. I need your words on paper, he grunted, wiping his massive hands on a rag. I ain't a man for words. Then I'll write them for you, she said, pulling out her paper. You just tell me, did Shaw Dalton ever cheat you? No, he said, offended. He pays on time. And his children, have you seen them? Aye, seen me in town. That little girl, Nora, sharp as a new nail. And the boy, he's quiet. Shaw's quiet. It fits. He looked at her. And I seen Luther Voss. He buys fancy. He wanted custom hinges, paid in gold, but he paid like he was doing me a favor. Shaw Dalton buys plain steel, and he pays like a man. You write that. She went to the innkeeper's wife, a stern woman who saw everything. She went to the old circuit-riding minister, who remembered baptizing the children's mother. She was a flighty thing, God rest her. He'd said, but Shaw, he was the rock. He is the rock. The Lord knows a father, Miss Calloway, even if the law does not. She even sought out the old Ute man, Taza, the one Shaw had once shared a blanket with during a blizzard. He was camped by the river. She did not ask him to write. She sat, and she waited, and she offered him tobacco. He smoked and looked at her. The man with the quiet children, he said. Yes, Wren said. The white man's law is a straight line. Taza said, drawing in the dirt. It does not bend for mountains. It is a fool's line. The people's law is a circle. It holds that man. Shaw, he holds his circle. Will you tell that to the judge? He pressed his thumb into the charcoal of her small fire. He pressed his thumbprint onto the bottom of a sheet of paper. That is my name, he said. When she returned, exhausted, she had 9 new letters. She found Huck by the hearth. He had not been idle. He had seen the pile of new letters. He had seen her signing them, and the minister, and the blacksmith. He dipped his small hand into the cold charcoal dust of the fireplace, and with a solemn, ritualistic gravity, he pressed his entire handprint onto the bottom of every single letter, one after another, a signature of soot and survival. The handprint of this house, Wren said to him, her voice catching. He nodded. It was exactly that. The next day, the postman, Silas, arrived. Not at the crossroads box, but at the ranch itself. He had a plaster-wrapped bundle under his arm and a single, dirty envelope in his hand. This came for you, he said, handing her the envelope. Wasn't mailed. It was left for me, anonymously. Wren tore it open. The handwriting was sharp, angry, and disguised. Pike took gold. I saw it. $300. In coin. From Voss. It was at the assayer's office, the day after he served you the first papers. He was paid for a negative guardianship report. Voss said it was to clear the basin of squatters. Pike said it was a pleasure. Wren's blood ran cold. This is it, Silas. This is the truth. It's an unsigned letter. Wren, he said, his face grim. It's slander. It's a whisper. Then we make it shout. She said, What's in the bundle? Silas unwrapped it. It was the plaster cast. He had gone back. The clay by the creek, he said. It held the shape perfect. Voss's boots. Custom from Denver. Left heel has a unique wear. This, he said, tapping the hard, white plaster, is his signature. Now we just have to match it. Wren looked at the evidence. The letters, the anonymous note, the wax, the boot cast. I have to see the judge, she said. Not in court. Before, I have to set the field. She rode to Silver Basin alone. The circuit judge, Ada Merrick, had already arrived and taken rooms at the hotel. Wren found her in the hotel dining room, a woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and a gaze that seemed to miss nothing. She was drinking black coffee and reading a law book. "Judge Merrick." The woman looked up. "You are not a lawyer." "No, Your Honor. I am Wren Calloway. I am the reason you are here." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Indeed. Sit, Miss Calloway. You have 5 minutes." Wren sat. She did not plead. She did not cry. She laid out the facts, her voice low, steady, and cold. She spoke of the abandonment, her arrival, the claims she had made in town, the storm, the sealing wax, the anonymous letter. Judge Merrick listened, her face impassive. "So, you come to me with gossip, Miss Calloway. You bring me an unsigned letter, a piece of wax, and a child's toy. You accuse a territorial registrar of bribery and a wealthy landowner of, what, inclement weather. I accuse him of attempted murder," Wren said, her voice dropping. "He drove cattle into a flood to destroy a home, my children." "Mr. Pike's report," the judge said, tapping a paper by her plate, "is quite clear. He lists an unstable guardian, unsafe structures, and children in clear and present danger. The danger, Judge, was the one he and Voss created." Judge Merrick sighed. "Miss Calloway, I am a woman of the law, not of the heart. What you have is circumstance. What Mr. Pike has is a clear, legal statute. These children are not, by blood, Shaw Dalton's, and they are certainly not yours. My hands are tied." "You came all this way," Wren said, leaning forward. "You're not a lazy judge. You're a fair one. That's your reputation. You are here to judge, not just to sign. You're right. My proof is circumstantial, but the statute is just paper. My home is blood and mud and work. I am asking you for time. You have 2 days until the hearing." "I don't mean time until the hearing," Wren said. "I mean time at the hearing. I mean, let me present this. Let me turn these whispers into evidence. Don't let him silence me with procedure." Judge Merrick looked at Wren, a long, appraising look. "You are a formidable woman, Miss Calloway. You sound like a Philadelphia lawyer." "I was a Philadelphia teacher," Wren said. "It's much the same." A small, thin smile touched the judge's lips. "Court convenes at 10 o'clock. Thursday. I expect a full house." Wren rode back, her heart a heavy, steady drum. She had not been dismissed. She found the house in a state of quiet, focused energy. The mud was gone. The floors were scrubbed. The broken fence was not mended, but piled for new wood. That night, they were all at the table. Nora was reading her statement, the one Wren had helped her write, her voice clear. "My name is Nora. I am 8 years old. I was found on the mountain. I was lost, and Miss Wren brought me home." She looked at Wren. "I want to add a part." Wren gave her the pencil. Nora bent, her tongue between her teeth, and slowly, carefully, wrote, "She is my mother. The blood does not matter." Poppy, who had been listening, looked up. She pointed at Wren. "Stay," she said, her voice a clear, perfect bell. "Stay, Mama." It was the first time she had put the 2 words together. Shaw, who had been sanding a piece of wood, went still. He looked at Wren, his face full of an emotion so deep it was painful. Later, he was in the small, dark storeroom, prying at a floorboard. "Shaw, what is it?" Wren asked, holding a lantern. "That note," he said, his voice muffled. "About the gold. It made me remember my wife, Elspeth. She hid things, money, secrets. But this I hid." He pulled up the board. Underneath was a small tin box. Inside was an old, leather-bound transaction ledger. "From before," he said. "When I was trying to build this place up, I made deals. With everyone." He flipped the pages, his thumb rough on the brittle paper. He stopped. "There," he breathed. Wren held the lantern closer. The page was a record of sale, but at the bottom, there was a different entry. for 6 head of yearling calves, gifted to S. Dalton by L. Voss for future considerations. Signed, Taggart. Taggart was Voss's foreman. He was binding you to him. Wren said, he thought he was. Shaw said, a new, hard light in his eyes. He thought he was buying my silence. Instead, he was signing his own confession. It's a pattern. The night before the hearing, the air was cool and still. Wren was on the porch, staring at the stars. She heard a sound, a wagon. It was Sadie, and behind her, the blacksmith on his mare, and the postman, and the sawyer, a silent cavalcade in the moonlight. Sadie, Wren said, her voice breaking. Did you think we were just sending letters? Sadie said, climbing down. The judge is in town. We're in town. We've set up a camp by the courthouse. We are testifying, all of us. They gathered, a small, grim, determined group, around the Daltons' fire pit. They had brought their own blankets and their own coffee. They were ready. Wren went inside, her heart too full to speak. She picked up the worn leather satchel she used for her school books. She began to pack. She packed the letters, each one bearing Huck's small, charcoal hand. She packed the anonymous note. She packed the old ledger, open to the page Taggart had signed. She packed the plaster cast of the boot, now hard as stone. She packed Nora's sampler. And on top, she placed the small, red disc of sealing wax. She hefted the bag. It was not a school bag. It was a weapon. It made no sound, but it was the heaviest thing she had ever held. The children were asleep. The house was a small, warm pocket of breathing, a fortress of quiet. Outside, the neighbors had settled, their own small fires winking in the dark around the courthouse in town, a ring of small, stubborn lights. At the ranch, the preparation was done. The bag of evidence sat by the door. The horses were fed. The mending was finished. There was nothing left to do but wait for the sun. Wren stood under the great cottonwood, the one by the creek. The moon was a thin, cold slice, like a ribbon of new silver, casting just enough light to turn the world to shades of gray and black. The leaves above her rustled, a dry, papery sound. She heard him approach. His bootsteps were not silent, but they were sure, a rhythm she had come to know as well as her own. Shaw Dalton did not walk on the earth. He was part of it. He came to stand beside her, not touching, just sharing the same patch of cool air. They looked out at the basin, at the dark, silvered line of the repaired fence line, at the mountain that had almost claimed Nora. It's a quiet night, he said. His voice was a low rumble. It's too quiet, she whispered. It's the quiet before the cannon. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He was dressed in his clean shirt, the one he wore to town, though it was the middle of the night, as if he could not bear to be unready. I'm afraid, Wren, he said, so low she almost missed it. The confession was so stark, so contrary to the man of rock and timber she knew, that it stopped her breath. She turned to look at him. I can build a house, he said, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. I can set a bone. I can track a deer in the snow for 2 days. But this paper, this talking. He shook his head. A man like Voss, a man like Pike. They use words I don't know. They twist things. What if I stand up there, in that room, and I don't have the words to keep my family? He turned to her, and the moonlight caught the deep, aching fear in his eyes. I am afraid of losing, because I don't know the rules of their fight. Wren looked down at her own hands, twisting them in the folds of her skirt. I know the rules. Shaw, I know the words. And that's what I'm afraid of. He frowned, not understanding. I'm afraid of this, she said, her voice a near whisper. I'm afraid of what I've become here, back east. I was a ghost. I was the woman who was empty. Here. She looked toward the house, toward the sound of Poppy's soft cough in her sleep. Here, my hands are full. And I'm afraid that if we lose, they will send me back. And that I'll leave. A hole. Another one. That Nora will think I abandoned her. That Huck will go silent again. That I will have to walk away from them. And the emptiness will be worse. Because now I know what it feels like to be full. She was crying, silent, hot tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "I am afraid of leaving them." He watched her, his rough-hewn face a map of emotions she could not read. He had watched her fight the flood, write the letters, stand up in town. He had not seen her cry. He lifted his hand. It was the hand of a rancher, large, scarred, the knuckles cracked. It was a hand that knew only work, and as it neared her, it was not steady. It trembled, a slight, almost invisible vibration. He did not touch her face or her shoulder. He reached for her hand. He laid his calloused, trembling palm against the back of her hand. It was small, ink-stained, and raw. The knuckles scratched from the flood, a fresh splinter from the firewood. His touch was so light it was barely a pressure. It was a question. Wren let out a shuddering breath. She uncurled her fingers. She turned her hand over, palm up, and laced her fingers with his. She held his gaze, and then she took their joined hands and brought them to her chest. She pressed his palm flat against her heart, his rough skin a sudden, shocking warmth against her through the thin wool of her dress. He went still. He could feel it, the frantic, rapid beat, a thump, 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 as fast as a hummingbird's wing. But it was not weak. It was strong, a powerful, living, resolute engine. She was terrified, but she was not broken. She was alive. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. She did not turn away. She rose on her toes, closing the last inch. The kiss was not the flash of a spark. It was the slow, deep, inevitable catch of a fire that had been banked for too long. It was not a kiss of passion, but of recognition. It was salt from her tears, and the faint, clean taste of mint from his evening tea. It was the scrape of his beard and the impossible softness of his mouth. It was a claiming, and a surrender, and a promise, all in one long, slow, deep breath. He tasted of the high country, of sap and clean air. She tasted of wood smoke and ink. They broke, but did not part. His hands moved to her waist, holding her. Her hands slid up his chest, to his shoulders. They rested, forehead pressed to forehead, shoulder to shoulder. Just breathing, sharing the same small space, the same cold night air. A gust of wind came down from the mountain, a reminder. She shivered. She was wearing a thin wool shawl, and it slipped from one shoulder. She fumbled for it. Shaw's hands left her waist. He caught the edges of the worn fabric. He did not just hand it back. He turned her, gently, and he himself draped the shawl over her shoulders, pulling the end snug across her chest. It was not a gesture of ownership. It was a gesture of pure, simple, unadorned protection. He was sheltering her. The shawl, held by his large, clumsy hands, slipped again. A small sound escaped Wren's throat, a half-sob, half-laugh. He, too, let out a low, breathy huff. They both reached for the slipping fabric at the same time, their hands brushing, and they laughed. A real, quiet, shared laugh in the darkness. It broke the last of the fear. He held her shoulders, his thumbs rubbing the wool, the solid, living woman beneath it. "Wren," he whispered, his voice a gravelly thing, his lips close to her hair. "I'm not asking for a perfect mother. I'm not asking you to be Elspeth. I'm just—" He paused, his breath warm. "I'm just asking you, don't leave this house. Don't leave us." She leaned her head against his chest. She could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart now, a deep, solid drum that answered hers. "I'm not leaving," she whispered, her voice fierce, muffled against his shirt. "I couldn't. I want to stay. With them. With you. I want to stay." He pulled her in, then a full embrace, his arms wrapping around her, one hand splayed across her back, the other holding her head to his chest, as if to protect her from the world. Her arms went around his solid, strong waist, and she held on, her fingers digging into the rough homespun. They just stood there, two shadows, now one, under the rustling leaves. His hand moved on her back, a slow, calloused, gentle motion. He was learning her shape. His fingers found the knot of a bruise, low on her back, from the flood, and his touch gentled. A question, a comfort. Her hands on his back felt the living, corded muscle, the strength that had held this family together. It was a slow, quiet discovery, like learning a new song by heart. It was intimate. It was sacred. It was, in its own way, a vow. The light that woke them was gray. It was the morning of the hearing. The house was tense, but it was a new, electric tension. The children were dressed in their best, which was just their cleanest. Nora's braid was perfect. Huck's face was scrubbed. Poppy's blue ribbon was tied in her curls. Wren was dressed, her gray wool dress, her armor. She was lacing her boots, her hands steady. Shaw was at the door, his hat in his hand. He was clean-shaven. He looked at her, and the house, and the children. He held out his hand. He was not holding hers. He was offering her something. In his palm was a thin, dark strip of leather, braided into a small, tight thong. "From my best saddle lace," he said, his voice quiet. "It's the strongest thing I own. It's never broken." He didn't offer to put it on her. He just offered it. Wren looked at it, then at him. She took it. It was warm from his hand. She did not tie it in her hair. She did not put it in her pocket. She tied it with a double knot around her wrist. It was not jewelry. It was a tether. It was a promise to return. She stood. She was ready. The heartbeat of the house, which had been frantic and defensive, had now settled. It was a low, steady, and certain beat. It was not a defense. It was an oath. The Silver Basin Courthouse was not a grand hall of justice. It was a single-room building of raw pine, smelling of old wood, sweat, and the sharp, metallic scent of fear. But on this day, it was the center of the world. The room was packed, standing room only. Sadie, the blacksmith O'Malley, the Sawyer, and a dozen other ranchers and townsfolk filled the benches, a silent, grim-faced jury of peers. At the front, Shaw Dalton sat at a small table, his great hands, scrubbed raw, resting on his knees. He looked like a mountain bear trapped in a small wooden cage, his Sunday suit too tight across the shoulders. Beside him sat Wren, her back ramrod straight, the worn leather satchel at her feet. Between them, Nora, Huck, and Poppy, clean and silent, a small, terrified island. In the back row, Luther Voss sat, his arms crossed, a look of bored amusement on his face. He was not a participant. He was a spectator, watching the final act of his play. At the plaintiff's table, Edwin Pike adjusted the collar of his clean white shirt. He looked calm, organized, his papers stacked in a neat, lethal pile. At 10 o'clock, Judge Ada Merrick entered. The room stood. She sat, her face iron, and struck her gavel. The sound was a sharp, final crack. "The court is in session," she said. "We are here to hear the matter of the guardianship of Nora, Huckleberry, and Poppy Dalton. Mr. Pike, you represent the interests of the territory. Proceed." Pike stood. His voice was smooth, reasonable, and utterly devoid of humanity. He cited the territorial statutes, his words a dry rain of numbers and clauses. Statute 22B, Your Honor, clear precedent. The children are not related by blood to Mr. Dalton. They have been abandoned by their legal mother. The home is, by my own inspection, unsafe. The guardian, Mr. Dalton, has no legal standing. He picked up a paper. My report, filed after the recent, unfortunate weather, confirms the structure is unsound, the location dangerous. I have no choice but to recommend the children be removed immediately and placed in the territorial home at Pueblo for their own safety. He sat down. It was a clean, legal execution. Judge Merrick looked at the table. "Mr. Dalton, your response." Shaw Dalton stood. He gripped the back of his chair. He opened his mouth. The room was deathly quiet. He looked at Pike, at Voss, and then at his hands. He was a man of action, and words were failing him. He looked at Wren. Wren stood, placing a hand on his arm, and he sat. "Your Honor," Wren said, her voice clear, ringing in the small room. "Mr. Pike, I believe," Merrick interrupted, looking at Pike. "That this woman has no standing." "Your Honor," Wren said, not backing down. "Mr. Pike is correct. I am not a blood relation. I am not a lawyer. I am, as he said, a hired woman. But I am also the only person in this room who was there when Mr. Pike's associates visited." The room murmured. Pike shot to his feet. "Objection, that is slanderous. Is it?" Mr. Pike, Wren asked, her voice dangerously quiet. She reached into her satchel. "Is this slander?" She placed the small, red disc of sealing wax on the railing, the one with the PE initial. "This was found in the mud at our ranch, dropped by a man who watched the flood, not a man who was caught in it." Pike's face went a shade paler. Or this Wren reached back into the bag. She pulled out the heavy, white plaster cast and set it down with a thud. "This is the boot print from that same visitor. The mud was thick, Your Honor. It held the shape perfectly. It is a custom boot. Left heel, worn low on the outside. Luther Voss, in the back row, uncrossed his arms. He instinctively looked down at his own feet. Mesa Calloway," Merrick warned. "This is theatrical." This is not theater, Your Honor." Wren said, "This is a home. Mr. Pike claims we have no ties to this community. I ask that you hear from the community itself." She nodded to Silas, the postman, who stood. "Permission to read the testimonials of those who could not leave their ranches." Merrick nodded. Silas's voice, the voice that brought news from the outside world, was steady. He read Sadie's letter, the Sawyer's letter, a dozen more, each one a nail of proof. He finished with the blacksmith's. His voice was loud, echoing. "Mr. O'Malley writes this house at Blue Mesa doesn't have a bell tower, but it keeps people, and it keeps them safe. Better than many churches I have seen." The silence that followed was heavy and pure. "I see," Judge Merrick said, her gaze now fixed on Wren. "And the children?" "Nora Dalton," Wren called. Nora stood. She was trembling so hard the paper in her hand rattled. She walked to the railing, her small boots sounding too loud. She looked at the judge. "My name," she began, her voice a tiny squeak. She stopped. She looked at Pike, and her face hardened. She looked at Wren, who nodded, her eyes bright. Nora took a deep breath. Her voice came back, and it was not a child's, it was a woman's. "My name is Nora Dalton. I am 8 years old. This is my home. Mr. Pike says it is unsafe. He is wrong. It is the only safe place I know. When I was lost, my father came for me. When I was hurt, Miss Wren found me. She told me we choose each other, and I choose them." She finished, her voice a clear shout. "She is my mother. The blood does not matter." She sat down. Sadie let out a sob. "Huck Dalton." Wren said, "Huck," his face pale. Walked up. He said nothing. He just unrolled his map, the one with the charcoal drawings, and handed it to the judge. Judge Merrick unrolled it. She looked at it, her stern face unreadable. "What is this, son?" Huck pointed to the small circle drawn by the hearth. "Poppy," he whispered, his voice rusty. "Safe. That is her safe place." A sound came from the front row. Poppy had slid off the bench. She toddled to the railing, her blue ribbon bouncing. She pointed at Wren, her face serious. "Stay," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "Stay, Mama." A ripple of laughter, warm and sudden, broke the tension. Men wiped their eyes. Even Judge Merrick's mouth twitched. She looked at Pike. "Mr. Pike, this is compelling, but it is not proof of wrongdoing." "We have that as well, Your Honor," Wren said. "I call Silas Reed to the stand." Silas, the postman, took the oath. "Mr. Reed," Wren said, "you are in the land office, the assayers, and the post office daily. Did you ever witness a transaction between Mr. Pike and Mr. Voss?" Pike was on his feet. "Objection, badgering slander. Sit down, Mr. Pike," Merrick snapped. "Answer the question, Mr. Reed." Silas looked at Pike. "I did." "The day after Mr. Pike served the first papers, behind the assayer's office, I saw Mr. Voss hand Mr. Pike a heavy satchel. Gold coin. I'd wager a lot of it. A lie. A fabrication. Pike was sweating now. A lie, Wren asked. She held up the anonymous note. A lie that was detailed in this letter, which stated the amount was $300, a lie that matches this. She held up Shaw's ledger. The one from the storeroom. This is Shaw Dalton's ledger. It shows a transaction, a gift of calves from Voss's foreman. Taggart, 2 years ago. It establishes a pattern of coercion and bribery. We have the man, we have the motive, and we have the boot. All the evidence was on the railing. The wax, the cast, the letters, the ledger, the sampler. Judge Merrick leaned back in her chair. She swiveled, slowly, until she was facing Edwin Pike. She did not look at Wren. She did not look at Voss. She just looked at the territorial registrar. "Mr. Pike," she said, her voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the room. "You took an oath. You serve the law of this territory, or so I am told." She leaned forward. "So you tell me, sir, who do you serve, the law, or do you serve a bag of gold?" Pike opened his mouth. A dry, croaking sound came out. He looked at Voss for help. His face was gray. He was silent. A scrape of a boot from the back. Luther Voss stood up, his face a mask of purple rage. "This is a circus. This is absurd," he bellowed. "I paid good money to have this dealt with. That ranch was supposed to be mine." The words hit the room like a gunshot. "Supposed to be." Voss clapped a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide, realizing what he had just admitted. Judge Merrick stared at him. "Supposed to be, Mr. Voss, as in, you had arranged for it, legally or otherwise. It was a public confession, a hammer blow." Merrick struck the gavel. Crack! "Silence!" she roared. She stood. "On the matter of guardianship, this court finds, based on the overwhelming, and I mean overwhelming, testimony of this community, and of the children themselves, that their welfare is unequivocally served by remaining in their home." She looked at Shaw. "This court hereby grants full, legal and binding guardianship of Nora, Huckleberry, and Poppy Dalton to Mr. Shaw Dalton, their father in all ways that matter." Shaw's head fell, his shoulders shaking. "Furthermore," Merrick continued, "this court officially recognizes Miss Wren Calloway as the resident caregiver and tutor, vesting in her full authority for the education, medical care, and welfare of these children." She was not done. Her eyes were chips of ice. "As for the other matters, this court finds sufficient cause to order a full territorial investigation into the actions of Mr. Edwin Pike for bribery and conspiracy, and Mr. Luther Voss for the same, and for the endangerment of minors." She looked at the bailiff at the back. "Bailiff, see that these two men do not leave Silver Basin. They have an appointment with the U.S. Marshal." Pike slumped, a puppet with his strings cut. The bailiff walked forward, and then the sound, the sharp, clean click of the handcuffs locking onto Edwin Pike's wrists. It was the prettiest sound Wren had ever heard. It was the sound of a spring trap, snapping shut. It was the sound of a bell, ringing for justice. The courtroom exploded. Sadie was weeping. O'Malley was pounding Shaw on the back, who was just sitting, his head in his hands. Nora and Huck were clinging to him, and Poppy was in his lap. Wren stood, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the railing. Her ears were ringing. She looked past the crowd, past the celebration. Her eyes found his. Shaw raised his head. He looked at her. His face was a wreck of tears and relief. He was not cheering. He was just looking at her. There was no glory in his eyes, no victory. Just a deep, fathomless, and bone-weary truth. A truth that passed between them in that single, silent look. They had kept the house. The afternoon sun was no longer a harsh, white judge. It was a soft, honey-colored light, the kind that soaks into the earth and promises peace. It slanted across the high country meadows, which had begun to heal. They had not planned a wedding. They had planned a housekeeping. That was what Sadie had called it, and the name stuck. It was a party to celebrate the fact that the house and the family had been kept. The neighbors were there. Not just the ones who had camped by the courthouse, but others who had heard the story. They came with wagons full of food, with fiddles, with patched-up blankets for the cool evening. Tin lanterns, punched with holes to make star patterns, were hung from the branches of the cottonwood and the eaves of the porch. It was not a grand affair, but it was a full one. The ranch, which had been a place of isolation, was now the center of a community. Shaw stood by the newly repaired corral, his sleeves rolled up, talking quietly with the blacksmith. He was laughing, a low, unused sound. Wren watched him from the porch, a cup of Sadie's strong coffee in her hand. The children were everywhere, running, their faces sticky with apple pie. Then, Sadie banged a spoon on a pot, and a hush fell. "Nora Dalton," Sadie announced, her voice booming with pride. "She has a thing to say." Nora, her face scrubbed bright, her braid tied with the blue ribbon from town, climbed onto an upturned apple crate. She held a piece of paper, but her eyes were fixed on Wren. She took a breath. Her voice was small, but it was as clear as the creek. "I wrote a poem," she said, and she read. "Home is a promise that we repeat, in dust, in rain, in steady feet. It isn't blood, or lock, or key. It's just the place we choose to be." She finished. There was a beat of pure, stunned silence, and then the applause. It was not the polite clap of an Eastern parlor. It was the sound of calloused hands, of farmers and miners, a roar of approval. Nora flew from the crate and buried her face in Wren's skirt, her body shaking with a new, powerful, good emotion. "Well," O'Malley the blacksmith said, wiping his eye, "she's a better talker than her PA." The laughter broke the spell, and the party resumed. But something had shifted. The children, as if on a cue, came forward. Huck, his silence his own, walked straight to Wren. He was holding his whittled horse. It was different, with a child's pure, problem-solving genius. Huck had taken 2 cross-sections of a small branch and affixed them as wheels. He had hammered them on with small, square-cut nails. He held the horse up to Wren. "Huck, it's beautiful," she said. He pushed it into her hands. "He has wheels now," Huck whispered, his voice still rusty, but sure. "So, no matter where you have to go, he knows how to come back. He knows the way home." Wren's knees felt weak. She clutched the horse, the smooth pine, the rough-cut wheels. "I'm not going anywhere. Huck." "I know," he said. He had given her not just a gift, but his trust, made of wood. Poppy, who had been watching, toddled over, not to Wren, but to Shaw. Her small fist was clutched tight. "For Ba," she said. Shaw crouched, bringing his great size down to her level. "What is it? Little bird?" She opened her fist. In her palm was a small, gray stone, worn smooth by the creek. It was shaped exactly like a perfect, polished teardrop. She placed it in Shaw's huge, scarred hand. "This is for you," she said, her voice full of a 3-year-old's profound seriousness. "So you can cry, if you want to." A wave of gentle, loving laughter rippled through the neighbors. Shaw Dalton, the man of stone, looked at the small, perfect stone in his hand. A tear he had not known was there, a tear for his lost wife, for his found family, for the terror and the relief, slipped and splashed onto the rock. He did not wipe it away. He closed his hand on the stone. "Thank you, Poppy," he whispered, his voice thick. "This is the best gift I have ever been given." He stood, holding the stone, and looked at Wren. The party, the people, the music, all of it faded away. There was only the space between them. He reached into his pocket. His hand fumbled. He did not pull out a ring from a jeweler's box. He pulled out a small, dark, heavy circle of metal. It was an iron ring, worn, pitted, and rough. "It's not diamond," he said, his voice so low, only she could hear it, the neighbors straining to listen. "It's not gold. It was in my tool chest." He held it out, so they could see. "I was 20 years old, working a silver mine. I was on a rope, and my hand was wet. I was slipping." He looked at the ring. This was just an iron link, On the wall. I hooked one finger through it, just as I fell. It held me. It tore my hand, but it held me for 2 hours, until they got me. It saved my life. He looked at Wren, his eyes full of a truth so deep it was the color of the earth. I don't have pretty words, he said, but this is the strongest thing I own. It held my life. Today, I'm asking it to hold my word. I'm asking it to hold you. Wren was crying. The silent, easy tears she was finally allowed to have. She held out her hand, the one with the ink stains and the splinters. He did not slide the ring on. He placed it in her palm. A question. Wren took a breath. She reached up, to her own neck. She untied the leather thong, the one he had given her, the one from his saddle, the one that had never broken. She took it, and she looped it around his neck, under the collar of his shirt. It was not a piece of silk. It was a frontier tie. It was a tether. "This is my word," she whispered. He touched it, his fingers on his own chest. And then Wren took the heavy, iron life-saving ring, and she slid it, with a steady, certain motion, onto the ring finger of her left hand. It was cold, and it was heavy, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and there, in the honey-colored light, surrounded by the smell of pine and potluck, he leaned down and he kissed her. It was not the kiss of the night before, the one of secret fears. This was a kiss of daylight. It was a kiss of promises, of bread, of hearths, of futures. It was a kiss that said home. The fiddle music swelled, the neighbors cheered, and Nora, Huck, and Poppy, seeing the world set right, ran and launched themselves at the two of them, their small arms wrapping around their waists. A tangle of family. Shaw and Wren, never breaking the kiss, just laughed, and their arms found the children, pulling them in, one small, complete, unshakable circle. Later, the last of the neighbors had gone, their lanterns bobbing away in the dark. The children were asleep, their faces peaceful. Wren sat at the planked table, the table that had been a school, a war room, and now, a feast hall. She lit a small lamp. She opened a new, clean journal, the one Silas had brought her. She dipped the pen. She looked at the heavy iron ring on her finger. She looked at the small, wheeled horse on the shelf. She looked at the blue ribbon tied to Poppy's bed. She began to write. "I came here," she wrote, her new, steady handwriting filling the page, "because I was told I could not make a life. But I was wrong. I did not make a life with my blood. I kept one by staying. There had been no church. There had been no new, official papers signed. There was only the gathering of people who had seen the truth and had sworn to uphold it. The people who would be back, in the spring, to help with the planting, and in the fall, to help with the harvest." Outside, the barn door, the one Shaw had mended, was open to the cool night air. The meadows, settled after the flood, seemed to breathe, and on the porch, in the pale silver moonlight, 4 shadows, 2 large and 2 small, had come out to look at the stars. They stood close, and in the light from the window, the 4 distinct shadows leaned in, and blurred, and became one. The house at Blue Mesa stood firm, not because of the logs, but because of the people who had, finally, and for good, chosen to stay. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We'd love to know where in the world you're listening from, so please leave a comment below to say hello and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to the Wild West Stories 1850 channel, like this video, and if you really enjoyed it, please hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners.